Welcome to our course Public Finance for my dear students in FMI program. Thanks, Yara. Today we will explain the first chapter in our textbook, Public Finance. But first, for our curriculum, we talk about two parts. Part number one, the theory of public finance. In chapter 1, we will talk about the government activity in the modern mixed economy. Chapter 2, efficiency. And number 3, externalities. And number 4, the theory of public goods. Number 5, introduction to taxation and approaches to tax equity, concepts of the tax system. And number 8 and 9, economic analysis of taxation and alternatives to taxation. For the part number 2, we talk about the application in public finance. So we talk about the public budget in Egypt and the public debt, and what about the deficit and inflation as a relationship between two variables and application in Egypt. For our chapter number 1, the government activity in the modern mixed economy. In this case, first, what do we mean by the government activity? Government activity, like any organization, provide goods and services for the residents or population. So, in this case, we should discover the relationship between which products provided by the government and how the government finance the goods and services. But what about the term mixed economy? Mixed economy is a market or an economic system. So in general, we talk about 3 economic systems. Number 1, the market economy system. In this case, the private sector play the key role in the economic activities, and limited rule for the public or for the government. What about the second form in the market system? We talk about managed or central economic system. In this case, the main rule or the key rule for the public sector or for the government, but limited rule for the private sector. So in between, this is the mixed economy. In mixed economy, we talk about in between case. So some considerable percent or some considerable the rule for private sector and the same for public sector. So around 50% for each part. Okay. Introduction to our chapter number 1. What about the objective of this chapter? To explore the role of government. So the government play important role in all economic activities or all economic system. But what about the range for this activity? This is based on the type of economic system. First, individuals, society, and the government. As we mentioned before, that governments are organizations formed to exercise authority over the actions of individuals. But for this point, we talk about the government, like any organization, try to achieve some goals for the residents or for population. So examples for government services may be national defense, and maybe police service, and maybe public health or public hospitals and public education. So for all these services, we talk about how to finance the cost to provide public services or public goods and services. This is the main problem for all nations. But in this case, we talk about a very important problem, which is maybe to provide any public goods or services, you need to finance through taxes. So tax is the key source to finance the government services or government goods and services. Examples for the government activities may be bridges, may be public hospitals, as we mentioned before, and infrastructure. But what about the rule of markets? The rule of market, this is based on what about the role of government. So we talk about two rules. Rule for market or private sector against rule for the government or public sector. The next point, political institutions. So in this case, we link the politics with economics. Political institutions constitute the rules and procedures to determine what government does and how government services are financed. So when we talk about, for example, in democratic regimes or democratic systems in some nations, in this case, the economic decisions for any public spending based on the voting, when the voters support some parts to provide some activities. But on the other hand, maybe in some political regimes, we talk about instructions or the direct decisions from the central government to provide product A, product 2, product 3, without any voting or neglecting the voters. So in general, in this point, we link between the political system and the economic system. In democratic, yes, the voters, very important priority, and they play a very important role in the decisions for the public spending. On the other hand, or on the other political regimes, no important voters to provide the public spending decisions. The next point, when we talk about the allocation of resources. So there are two categories, yes, government goods and services and private goods and services. But in this or at this point, we talk about a very important problem in economics, which is scarcity. Scarcity faced by all nations, all countries, may be rich, may be poor. So to provide or to increase the public goods and services, this requires to decrease the private goods and services. Negative relationship. So what about the real cost of government goods and services? Suppose the ticket for any public transportation, the real cost for any public transportation ticket equal 15 Egyptian pounds. But actually, the residents in Egypt pay only 5 Egyptian pounds. What about the gap? The gap equals subsidies. The government provides subsidies for the residents in Egypt by 10 Egyptian pounds. So, in this case, this is a rule for the government to subsidy and provide public goods. So, are they clear now the relationship between the government goods and services and private goods and services? This is very important shape or figure in economics, production possibility frontier. In production possibility frontier, we compare between two categories, government goods and services per year and private goods and services per year. So in this case, we focus on the production process. We focus on the production process. So suppose we are on the point A, at point A. At point A, this nation or this country produce X1 from private goods and services against G1 from government goods and services. Suppose this country try to increase the government goods and services per year, like public hospitals, public schools, and so on. So the production process shifts from point A to point B. So the production of government goods and services increased from G1 to G2, against declining in the private goods and services from X1 to X2. So why this problem? Why when we increase the government goods and services must declining the private goods and services? Because we face the economic problem or relative scarcity in this case. So in our curriculum, we focus on how you can allocate resources. We can create or we can provide our recommendations for all governments how you can allocate scarce resources. The term allocate or allocation equal that you rearrange your priorities and compare between priorities and resources. So this is the concept of allocation of resources. So the next, how government goods and services are distributed. In the last point, we presented the process of production. Yes, if you want to increase production of private goods and services, you must decrease the public or government goods and services. But the distribution process in this case, the government goods and services are distributed to individuals through the use of non-market rationing. So this is non-market rationing. So this is against the market rationality. Against the market rationality. But first, when we explain the government goods and services are not made available to individuals according to their willings to pay, and their use is not rationed by price. So the concept of non-market rationing, so in this case we talk about there is a neglect for the concept of willing and the ability to pay. For examples, when the services are available to all, this is the case number one. The services available to all without any neglection for any residents. So in this case, we talk about pure public services or pure public goods and services. For example, national defense, police services. National defense and police services, a good example for the pure goods and pure public goods and services or pure government goods and services. So you will not pay any direct payment for this benefit. So you cannot exclude any resident. You cannot exclude any resident to benefit from the national defense and police service. What about case 2? In case 2, in some cases or some goods or some public goods and services, there are some criteria and factors and conditions to benefit from this good or this public good or this government good and service. For example, in Egypt, when we talk about the program of Takaful Karama, Takaful Karama is a program for social protection. To benefit from this program in Egypt, maybe a minimum age requirement, maybe the family status, maybe the residence, maybe the minimum level of income monthly, and so on. So in this case, if you achieve the condition, okay, you can benefit from this program. So in this case, talk about semi-public goods and services, not pure. Another or case number 3, when we talk about transportation, in our public transportation in Egypt, if the price you pay for a ticket not equal the real cost, in this case, there is a subsidy from the government. So the subsidy from the government make a burden for public budget in Egypt. What about case number 4? We can conclude that public finance studies how the means of rationing is the use of the government goods and services, financing, resources, cost, incentives, and so on. So, generally, we talk about cases you cannot exclude any resident, like defense services and police services. Some cases you can put or insert conditions to benefit from public goods and services, and in other cases the resident pay only a part of the cost or some of the cost for the real cost. Mixed economy definition and pure economy. As we mentioned before, the mixed economy is the one which the government provides a considerable amount of goods and services. At the same time, the government regulates private economic activities and collect revenues or collect taxes and subsidies to affect incentives of resources. So this is mixed economy. In general, mixed economy relationship between the private sector and public sector. What about pure market economy? Pure market economy, the key rule for private sector. Pure market economy, the key rule for private sector. So, which part or which factor or which was the effective rule for private sector? Private sector produce, private sector distribute, and all goods and services based on the market power or supply and the demand to determine the price. The next point, what about circular flow of mixed economy? Circular flow in mixed economy. Our figure number 1-2, circular flow in the mixed economy. We talk about three sectors: firms or business, government, and households. So, the started point, we started from the household sector. This line, household sector, provide resources to the firms. Household sector provides the resources to the firms, and the firms employ or operate resources to produce goods and services. This is the first circle, and this is the first circle we can call real sector or real circular. What about the second? The second circle started from firms. Firms provide the cost of resources, dollars or Egyptian pounds, and to the households, and the households use the income or dollars to purchase goods and services. So the second circular, we talk about monetary circle. What about sector number 3, the government? Government make a relationship between the two sectors. For the firms, maybe provide subsidies and at the same time collect taxes and provide government service. For household, in this time we talk about the government provide income support and subsidies and social protection and so on. At the same time collect taxes. So in this case the government provide government services. So in this case, the last point in our lecture today, market failure and the function of the government. The concept of market failure, what do we mean by market failure? Market failure equal when you achieve a benefit as an individual or firm without any payment. If you achieve a benefit from any public goods or services without any payment. So the next, in many cases government can provide individuals with items that they cannot easily make available by individuals. So in general, government can provide goods and services that private sector cannot produce. The government use their power to redistribute income and economic opportunity among citizens. So in this case, what about redistribution of income? Redistribution of income, the government use taxes or collect taxes from rich class to provide subsidies to poor class. Stabilization, this is concept or this concept related to economic fluctuations. Maybe in the poem or in the case when the economic cycle tend to up. In this case, we talk about increasing in inflation, so maybe we increase tax at the government. But in other cases, in recessions, in this case, we talk about the price or inflation rate decreased, and we can create or provide incentives for the business sector by decreasing the tax. Number 4, governments regulate production and consumption to achieve goals to improve public health and elimination of monopolistic control over price. In general, governments need to encourage competition. So we finished our chapter number 1. Thanks, my dear student, for your attention.